Welcome back, 5th graders. We are going on to Unit 7, Lesson 18. In this lesson, we are learning how to divide by a decimal. I know that I showed you one problem in our last lesson, Lesson 17, but that is what this lesson will be all about, so you'll really become experts at it. Now, before you get nervous or anxious about this, just keep in mind that the process is exactly the same. All you have to do is move the decimal before you start solving, so it's really very simple. If we take a look here at this first example, I have 7 5/10 divided by 25 hundredths. Essentially, all you have to do is first move the decimal in the divisor. So you'll see here that they did that right away by moving the decimal so that we're creating a whole number 25. So they went 2 hops over so that we now have the whole number 25. Now, the trick here, the catch, is that whatever you do to the divisor, you must also do to the dividend. So then they took the decimal from the dividend, 7.5, and moved the decimal 2 hops to the right. So then we did the same treatment to both numbers. So that created the number now 750. So then when you solve this problem, you could find the final quotient. So I'm going to write that off to the side to go ahead and solve. Well, I know that 25 does not go into 7. Now, I do know that 25 goes into 75. I'm almost positive it's 3 times perfectly, but I'm going to check just to be sure. 3 times 5 is 15. Carry the 1. 3 times 2 is 6. Plus 1, 75. Yep. So I'll put the 3 up and then subtract 75, which gives me a 0, and then I bring down a 0. And remember, here's where you have to think, okay, does 25 go into 0? Nope, put up a 0. 25 times 0 gives you 0, so now we have no remainder. So your answer or quotient for this specific problem would be 30. So again, same process, you just have to move the decimal first. In the second example, they show the same thing. They had 6 and 85 hundredths divided by 5 tenths. So the first thing they did is they take the decimal in the divisor, and they moved it 1 to the right to give us the whole number 5. You'll notice here that they pointed out that the decimal is now after the 5, but that we don't need it. So then they just changed it to regular old 5. Now keep in mind that whatever I do to the divisor, I also have to do to the dividend. So they took their decimal in the dividend and moved it 1 to the right as well. So now our number has changed to 68.5. So now I'll go ahead and solve this problem as well, so you can see that again it's the same process. We just had to move the decimals first. So I know that 5 goes into 6 one time. 5 times 1 is 5, so then I'll subtract that, and I get 1. Bring down my 8. Here I have 18. 5 goes into 18 3 times. I'm going to bring my decimal up right now so I don't forget it at the end. 5 times 3 is 15. When I subtract, I'll end up with 3. Bring down my 5. Ooh, and that's a nice compatible number, 35. I know 5 goes into 35 perfectly 7 times. So I end up with the final answer, 13 and 7 tenths. So again, same process you've been learning throughout this whole time. You just have to remember if there's a decimal in the divisor, the number outside here, you have to move it first and then do the same treatment to the dividend as well.
Alright, boys and girls, this slide just is to show you how we can divide by decimals. We can change decimal divisors to whole numbers. It says it's easier to divide when the divisor is a whole number. We can change the divisor to a whole number by using the strategy below. Okay, we're going to do the problem 6 divided by 2 tenths. You can see that we know that 6 divided by 2 tenths can be written as a fraction, 6 over 0.2. Now, we have learned with equivalent fractions that we can multiply numerator and denominator by the same thing, and that doesn't change the value of that fraction. So with that knowledge that we have, we can change 6 to 60 and 2 tenths to 2. That makes us get rid of that decimal point, and now we know that it's 60 divided by 2, and that makes the problem pretty easy. We get 30 for an answer. Now I want to point something out. we started with a number of 6 and we finished with an answer of 30. So, as you can see, when you divide by a decimal, we actually, it's all the times in the past when you divide, you get a smaller number. When you divide by a decimal, you actually get a larger number. So it's actually more like multiplying than it is dividing. It's kind of the same rule as when we learned when we multiply by a fraction, like 1/8 times 60. We end up getting a smaller number. So same kind of a concept. When you're dividing by a decimal, you get a larger number. So remember that.
Again, ladies and gents, this is just showing us with long division how we solve, just like with the first slide when I introduced. So you can see here that they had the original problem. I'll rewrite it so you can see it a little bit better. 6 divided by 2/10. So again, they're showing us that before you have to do anything, before you can start solving, you have to move the decimal in the divisor. So in order to make this a whole number, I have to move it 1 to the right. So that gives me the number 2. Okay? Remember, I don't actually need this decimal here, so I could just rewrite that as plain old 2. However, now I have to do the same treatment to the number inside my box, or the dividend. So if I moved 1 to the right with my divisor here, I have to do that in the box as well. So I move that 1 to the right. Well, now I'm left with a blank space. Remember, we've learned that when you have a blank space like this, you replace it with a 0. So now I have the new dividend 60. So then when you solve, boys and girls, you now have 60 divided by 2. So I put 2 goes into 6 3 times perfectly, subtract 6, I get 0, bring down the next 0, and then I have to remember that 2 cannot go into 0, so I have to put up a 0 to represent that. So then I end up with the answer 30.
Okay, this is just following our same problem here. We're still dividing 6 divided by 2, but in number 23, we're going to show you 6 divided by 2/100. Now, remember, the first step to solving this is to come over here and move our decimal places 2 to the right, so I end up with just 2. And we're going to do the same thing in our dividend there. So when we move the decimal 2 to the right, we're going to actually add 2 zeros. Alright, and then when I divide, I can see my answer is 300. And the decimal point now is way here at the end. You sure can put the decimal point there, but since there's no more numbers, it's not needed. The answer to that is 300. Okay, now just look what happens. How does the problem change in the next one? Because we have 2,000s. Well, again, the first step is get rid of the decimals. Notice I have to move the decimal 3 places. So I'm going to move this decimal 3 places, which means I'm going to add 3 zeros. And when I divide, I'm going to get an answer of 3,000. So you can see each decimal place, all it did was add another 0 to each one of my answers. Okay, so pretty easy concept. Just move the decimal. You got to move it in both the divisor and your dividend, same number of spaces. And remember, if the dividend doesn't have a decimal, like if 6 didn't have a decimal after it, okay, remember any number we can add a decimal at the end.
Alright, boys and girls, last slide here that I'm doing before the ticket to class is just showing you a couple of examples. Here I have 45 divided by 5/10. Now, I notice that my divisor here has a decimal. I need to change that so that it does not have one, or at least change it to a whole number. The way I can do that is take my decimal and move it 1 to the right. That would give me the whole number 5. Okay, remember, I don't have to write the decimal after 5, so I can even rewrite it just like this, 5. Now, because I did that to the divisor, I must also move the decimal in the dividend. Well, you'll notice that the dividend doesn't have a decimal, but remember, if I add a 0.0 here, that still is the number 45. It doesn't change the value. So now I can move that decimal that I've brought in 1 to the right as well. Remember, same treatment. So that gives me the new number of 450. Now I can go ahead and solve. I know 5 does not go into 4. 5 does go into 45 perfectly. It goes in 9 times. So then I'll subtract 45. That will give me zeros. I still have a 0 to bring down, however. So here's where I ask myself, does 5 go into 0? Nope, it goes in 0 times. 5 times 0 is 0, so when I subtract, I'm left with no remainders. So our final quotient then would be 90 for number 25. Alright, number 26, we're looking at 56 divided by 7/100ths. So again, before I do anything else, I need to get rid of the decimal here in my divisor. In order to do that, I'm going to move that 1, 2 to the right. That would give me the new number 7, or 7 here. If I write it with the decimal or without, it's still the same thing. Now, again, because I did that to the divisor, I have to do that to the dividend as well. So I'm going to add a point and a 0, so now I have a decimal to move. And since I went 2 to the right in my divisor, I do the same thing here. So I have 1, 2. Now you'll notice that I'm left with a blank space here, so I need to put up a 0. And now I have the new number 5,600. So now when I go ahead and do my division, I know 7 does not go into 5, so put up a 0. 7 does go into 56 8 times perfectly. So I'll subtract 56. That will give me 0. I have to bring down my first 0. 7 does not go into 0, so I put up a 0. 7 times 0 is 0. Subtract again, I'll have another 0, but I still have one more to bring down. So that means I have to look at, does 7 go into 0 one last time? And no, it goes in 0 times. And then I know I'll have no remainders. Okay, so now my final quotient is 800. So again, just remember to move the decimals the same amount and same direction when you're getting rid of it from the divisor.
Alright, I hope after this lesson we all see that dividing by decimals is really no different than our long division we've been doing for the last couple weeks here. You just have to get rid of that decimal point in your divisor, and you have to move it in your dividend, and then you just divide just like we have been doing all along. So I want you to read this puzzled penguin problem, and I want you to write a response to it on the back of your ticket, and we will see you in class tomorrow.